it kind of freaked me out. I just saw this big ball of light fly behind the house. I think it was aliens or something. A couple times that week, I thought I kept seeing it out of the corner of my eye. I am Johnny Two Bears, and I have been doing Sasquatch research since about 2017, 2018. Before that, I had pretty much zero interest in the topic at all. Um, I know there are a few things that happened in my life that kind of, I guess, opened me up to the possibility whenever it arose. I know one was I was in a Marine Corps for 6 years, and in 2003, I was standing in Iraq along with my unit, and years before the Iraq papers would come out, the general public would know what was going on over there. It was a big joke to us. We knew that we would never find any WMDs. It was my first taste of how power and people in charge can kind of manipulate, the public at large. Just at a young age, I opened up to really realizing that we're not being told everything about our reality. Um, and I guess I did 6 years. I got out. I did about 3 years doing fire and rescue. I wound up getting in a real bad accident and kind of ended that career path. Later on in 2008, I met my wife, wound up getting married, having kids, just normal stuff. I've been with the same company for about 13 years now. And in 2018, or not 2018, 2012 is another big event that opened my eyes to, I guess you could say, what's actually going on in reality. I found another, like when I was 18 years old, I guess you could say I was saved. I became Christian through a family Bible study. Didn't grow up believing in God, none of that stuff. I actually remember making fun of my friends that used to go to church in high school, saying, I can't believe you believe all that trash. But through a series of events, I became Christian.
Hi, I'm Linda Eastburn of Linda Eastburn YouTube channel, and I have a new book out called Threshold to Encounters. It's about 40 years of research and experience with all of these wild cryptids that many of you I know have encountered yourself. You can find it on Amazon.com.
I went through some hard times, and my faith definitely wavered. It basically bottomed out, and I remember the day sitting in my roommate's living room, I looked up in the sky and told God to, I used some bad words, told him to go away, basically. Told him to F off, was basically what happened. And it would take years for me to get back to my faith. Now, in 2011, we moved to the house that I live in now. It is, I live about 50 minutes northwest of Atlanta. We are in kind of a semi-rural area. My house sits back in like a little hole in the trees or in the woods. And right behind me is a wildlife management area. Well, shortly after moving here, my wife and I, we had a bunch of problems. And I fully admit 99% of that was because of me and my lack of faith. But one of the biggest changing events for me and what started all of this out here, and also the second time I realized we haven't really been told the truth about our reality, happened in the summer of 2012. My wife and I were in probably the worst fight that we're ever going to have. And I had decided that I was leaving, that I had had enough. And really what it was is, for the first time in a couple of years of fighting, it was actually her fault this time. So I had my excuse to leave. Is all it really boiled down to. And I was leaving that night. The kids had already gotten in bed. Her and I were arguing real bad. I told her I was packing up and I was leaving the next day. Um, she went back to our bedroom and she was actually reading the Bible. And I left, went and got a Subway sandwich, came back, ate the sandwich, and I'm thinking about everything, what I'm going to do. I'm going to pack up. I'm going to leave the next day. And I start getting this real weird urge. I can even see it in my head to go lay down. I've got this big rock in my front yard. And I kept getting this feeling like I wanted to go lay on this rock and look at the sky. And I'm like, what is going on here? I'm not, what kind of hippie trash is this? Why do I want to go lay on a rock and look at the sky? But I did it. I went and I got a pillow off the couch. I went and laid down on this big rock. And my house is off to my left. And I'm laying there and I'm smoking a cigarette, looking up. It's maybe an hour before dark. And I get down with my cigarette, I put it down, and I go to turn to my left towards my house, and a ball of light, an orb about the size of maybe a cantaloupe, comes flying through the woods and goes behind my house. And the only thing I could think is UFO. That was really the only weird thing that I even thought possibly existed at that time. Uh, so that's what I thought it was. It was a ball about this big, about as big as a cantaloupe, bright, like orangish red, and it just flew back behind the my house. And I jumped up and I ran to the other side of my house. I figured it was going to come out the other end, but it didn't, and it kind of freaked me out. I'm like, I don't know what this thing is or where it went. So I went inside, and keep in mind now we're in the fight of our lives, but my wife's laying there in bed, and I'm like, look, I just saw this big ball of light fly behind the house. I don't know what it was. I think it was aliens or something. I don't know. And it was very simple, but it kind of it just struck me at the time. My wife said, "Well, only thing we can do about it is pray." And she was right. I'd had all this training, uh, combat training, shooting, fighting, the whole nine yards. And there's what am I going to do with that? With a ball of light? None of that's going to be useful at all. I had no idea what I was dealing with, so I just bowed my head and I prayed. And I remember thinking in the middle of that prayer that there's no way in the world that I could leave my family, that they're mine to protect, that no matter what we were going through, I had to cut out everything I was thinking. Uh, I wasn't going anywhere. Well, that I got done praying. I went and I went back in the living room and I sat down and I heard it sounded like something was on the roof. So I jumped up, I ran outside, and I'm looking around on top of the roof. I don't see anything. I come back inside and then I sit down on my couch and I just turn the TV on. And shortly, maybe I don't even know if it was 5 minutes later, my wife screams my name, like blood curdling scream, like you hear in a movie. And I jumped up, jumped over the back of the couch, and I ran into the bedroom. And I said, "What?" She said, "I saw it." And I was like, "You saw what?" She said, "That ball of light." And she said that whenever she got done reading, she reached over, turned the lamp on, and went to pull the covers up, and that ball of light appeared to her left, about 2 feet away, about the size of a pea. She said it was bright as like the end of a lit cigarette in a dark room. And when she screamed, it went away. Well, now I'm really freaked out. I don't know what I'm dealing with. Uh, I go and get the kids, put them in bed with us, stay up till about 3 o'clock in the morning, put the kids back in bed. Nothing's happened. I turn off all the lights. I turn off our bedroom light. I go and lay down in bed. And just like my wife did, I went to pull the covers up. And to my left, that same ball of light appeared. And it was just like it was the same thing I saw outside, except really small, about the size of a pea, like she described. And I looked over at it and I reached over and I slapped her in the leg and I said, "It's back." And she woke up, got the kids back in bed again. Nothing else happened that night. Um, it really freaked us out. I actually wound up contacting MUFON, I think, within that week and reporting it. Because, like I said, all I knew before was about UFOs. And throughout that week, I kept catching what I thought was that ball of light to the right of them. Like I sit in my living room in my recliner, and my fireplace is to the right. Why would I? A couple times that week, I thought I kept seeing it out of the corner of my eye, but I never could get a good look at it. Well, it got to the very end of the week, and I hadn't mentioned that I'd been seeing it a couple more times. My wife was still freaked out about it. She didn't want to talk about it. The MUFON people actually said they wanted to come by, and my wife didn't want to have any part of that. So I was like, no, we'll just deal with it. I don't know what it is. But the guy said something that, kind of stuck with me. He said, I think you're dealing with something spiritual. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. It's like, how could I be so blind as to not be able to understand what's going on? But at the end of that week, my wife's still freaked out and she works from home, um, selling stuff online. And she's like, I've got to go downstairs and get some stuff out of the basement. And so I said, all right, well, I'll just wait at the top of the stairs because all she had to do was run down the bottom of the stairs and get something. Well, she ran down there, grabbed whatever shipping envelope she had or whatever. She's coming back up. And as she's coming up, that ball of light, that orb appears, I don't know, maybe about 6 inches to 10 inches above her head. And as she steps, I mean, it's perfectly staying with her. And she takes about 3 steps and it disappears. And I did not say a word to her. I mean, I'm 3 feet away from her when I see this thing over her head. And I didn't say anything to her. Number one, I didn't. I knew she'd want to move. That would just be too much, basically. Uh, but it really affected both of us. It really, to me, it obviously felt to me after I had a time to sit back and realize what was going on. It felt like intervention. It felt like God was. It was answered prayers. He knew I was hard headed and that I needed to see some type of, I guess, proof. I don't know. But whatever it was, it worked because, things didn't change overnight. But I mean, we just had our 16th wedding anniversary, and things have just consistently gotten better over the years. Uh, but that was really the second event in my life that opened me up to the reality that, hey, we we don't know what's going on. There's things out here that we don't understand, you know, really important things that you would think would be just a daily part of our reality and conversation. Because I know if I experience something like that, other people have, you know. But it was life changing. So that was 2012, and there was from 2012 until about probably, I don't know, maybe 2020. I've only got two neighbors around here. Both are about 100 yards away from me. Between 2012 to about 2017, 2018, 2020, I don't know, somewhere in there. I did not start documenting all the activity until about 2019 or 2020. But there's 4 people in my house and 3 people between my neighbors. So there's 7 of us who, over the years, had seen orbs. Um, it wasn't just a one-time event. We came home from baseball practice one afternoon, and we all got out of my truck And this is, again, this is maybe 2 hours before dark. And we get out of my vehicle and we start walking towards the house. And my son says, "What is that blue light?" And I look over in the wood line and there is another orb. But this time it's a blue one. And it's, I don't know, maybe about the size of a baseball. And I just yelled at them, "Hey, y'all go get inside." And this is how it took me years to figure out like what was kind of going on, even with the first interactions. I didn't just like that week go, "Oh, it was God and he loves me and things are great." I mean, this would take a process of years to figure out, to put two and two together. But after seeing that blue orb, uh, hustled the family inside the house, and I came outside with a pistol. Um, being the good old knuckle crawler that I am, I thought I was going to go over there where that orb was, and I shot 2 rounds into the dirt because I still had no idea what I was dealing with at that time. It still freaked me out. Um, but there would be 7 of us over the next couple of years that would have different experiences with orbs. And I think the last one that I saw was maybe 2019. I'll have to look at the video. I actually got one on video behind my house. But around 2017 is when the Sasquatch activity started. And I didn't know what in the world I was dealing with. I didn't know anything about the topic. Like I said before, never had any interest. But it started out with, and before I even go down this road, I know there's a lot of people who have different opinions on what Sasquatch is. And you would think a lot of times it comes to people's beliefs as to what they think Sasquatch is. Now, you would think that maybe with a Christian background, I would think these things are spiritual, especially with the orb activity. After 7 years of doing this, I don't personally believe that's true. I've never seen the two together, and just because there are two unexplained phenomenon in the same area does not make them the same phenomenon. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. So I kind of try to keep the two separate. And there was an actual separation between when the people quit seeing the orbs around here, probably right before the Sasquatch activity started. And I think I've only seen one orb here since, and that was the one I got the recording of. But it started out at my neighbors, and they seemed to be the focus of all the activity. And it was activity that was like a nuisance, basically rock throwing, stick throwing, banging on their house at night, just basic stuff like sound like people walking around in the woods at night that I could never find. So that's kind of how it all started. My neighbor actually, he got hit in the chest with a rock when him and another family member were walking down the driveway at night. A bunch of weird things were going on over there. And every time something would happen, they would actually call the police department or the sheriff's department. They had a family member that worked there, so they didn't have a problem with calling. And it got so bad, it got to the point where it's like maybe once every 2 weeks they were calling the cops out here. And I would respond every time. And I can't tell you how long it took me. It was probably in between 6 months to a year to get to the point of this crazy activity to where it was like, this can't be human because they're too good. They're showing up and disappearing without, there's only so many things a human being can do at night. You know, I mean, we're talking things that it just seems like it would take way too much skill to accomplish, especially with several of us with guns and flashlights going around looking for, whatever was happening out here. And then eventually the some of the activity started over here. And it was, I'll never forget the first night I heard my first wood knock, and I had no idea what it was. My dogs have been a big help over the years. We raised German shepherds, and I've got a horse fence around my property. And one night the dogs went crazy. They went to the back of my property and they're barking. I went and got a flashlight and I walked to the back to where my fence is, and there's pallets stacked up. And I went to stand up on those pallets so I could shine my light further back into the woods. And I heard whack, just a super loud wood knock. And at the time, like I said, I didn't know what it was, but it sounded like a baseball bat on a telephone pole, like super loud. Shortly after that, there was another evening where the dogs did the same thing, except this time when I went out there, I could hear it was actual bipedal footsteps. And there is a part in my woods where my chicken coop is now, but back then it was just woods. And maybe 25, 30 feet away, I could hear bipedal footsteps. And I shine my light over there, and they'd stop walking. And I'd turn off the flashlight, and it would start walking again. Well, I probably did that 5 or 6 times. Every time I would hit that area with a light, it would stop walking. And then I'd turn off the light and it would start walking again. And it never changed trajectory. It stayed in a straight line. There's a little bit of a, like 50 feet away, there's a little bit of a hill that goes up and goes back down again and keeps going into the woods. And I stood there for probably 6, 8 minutes doing this, turning that light on, getting it to stop, and then turn it back off again. And it was just walk. And I thought that was super odd. Um, I guess one of the events that actually really made me start looking into like other, I didn't know what it was. I thought it was humans. It was a combination of human slash animal. There was noises and slapping on trees, and it was just super confusing. But one of the nights that my neighbor, I was over at my house and I heard gunshots, and it was rifle shots, and I knew it was at my neighbor's house. So I got my rifle and ran over there, and he was standing outside. I'm like, "What happened, man?" And he said, "I can't remember. Something threw either rocks or sticks at the window again." So he came outside and shot a couple rounds into the dirt. And he said, "I've called the cops." I'm like, "All right, well, I don't want to be standing here with a rifle when the cops show up. So I'm going to go get in the wood line between my house and your house." And I walked back and I got down on a knee, and I'm sitting there looking around, and he's just standing out there in his front yard waiting on the cops. And from probably about 60 feet away from the wood line, there is a stick about this big, probably 14 inches long, and about as big around as I don't know, a little smaller than a golf ball. Comes flying end over end out of the woods and hits him right in the chest. It scares him so bad he cusses and he falls and he tries to run inside, falls going up the steps, and I'm just sitting there like just dumbfounded, like what? What are we dealing with here? What idiot just threw a stick at a man that came out here with a rifle, trying to scare off whatever it was. That incident really kind of, I think, changed my mindset. Like something's going on here. Now, I guess the only thing I had really learned or knew about Sasquatch had been from like TV. I had seen Finding Bigfoot and a few other documentaries. Um, Stuff like that would come on the history. I would pick things up here and there just because it was like the only type of TV that me and my kids could sit down and watch together. So I guess I picked up on a few things because I started putting a little bit of the clues together, and I started specifically looking for Sasquatch. Um, Not really believing, but almost to the end of my rope, trying to figure out what was going on around here. And eventually I'd wind up finding structures back by the creek. There's a creek about 300 yards away from the back of my property. I found logs about 5 feet tall and probably about as big around as a softball, three of them shoved into the ground about 10 feet apart. Found little X structures back there. We wound up finding my son and I one afternoon during the wintertime, found the first track that I ever found. And it was actually a three-toed track. And I would wind up finding that same track over the years. And I believe this is left foot. The left foot has three toes, the right foot does not. I don't know if it's a birth defect or injury or whatever it is. But that was the first track and one of the first aha moments. Like maybe these things are real, you know? So I did kind of get a little impatient, and I was also starting to get a little more aggressive because I was still 90% sure this was human that I was dealing with, and I didn't like it. I didn't like the fact that I couldn't catch. I didn't feel like I was able to protect my family. Is honestly what it felt like. Because whatever this was running circles around me, basically. So I wound up having a surgery on my neck and my shoulder. I had two surgeries. I had a disc replacement and a rotator cuff repaired. And during my recovery, I would just walk around in the woods, looking at, I guess, kind of looking for structures and looking for other signs. And then the better I got this great idea that, you know what, I'm going to start doing armed patrols at night. So I would get a gun and a flashlight, and I would go out in the woods, and I would basically be a nuisance, just walk around. If I would find something that looked like a structure or whatever, I would break it, kick it. Um, I wanted to just be a presence, and I was also testing. I wanted to see, all right, are these things real? You know, I didn't know what to do. I just did that out of pure frustration. That probably did that for maybe a week and a half, and during that time, uh, I'd gotten better. So I was building my kid's treehouse, and I was working on my kid's treehouse, and it was that kind of at the side yard. And I got done working on it that afternoon, and maybe again about 2 hours before dark, I put all my tools up. I'm sitting on the front porch, I'm drinking coffee, and right in the wood line behind the treehouse, there's a tree back there, and it just starts shaking, it, like real violently. It's about as big around as my thigh is, and I can't see the bottom 10 feet of this tree. So I jump up and I run to the edge of my yard, and I look down there, and I don't see anything. But this is obviously something extremely weird, especially during the daytime, you know. Uh, so I'm like, oh yeah, I'm definitely going out tonight. Maybe that was one of these things. I don't know what it was, but I didn't have another explanation. Nothing fell out of that tree. There was no humans back there. I didn't know what was going on. So that night, I got all my gear together. Uh, had a pistol, a flashlight. By this time, I had actually bought a real cheap thermal. A couple hours after dark, I open up my front door, and my German shepherds go straight to that side of the yard and start barking like something's over there. So I run out, I go out of my gate, and I go up my driveway a little bit, and I'm at the top of this hill, and there is a trail that splits me and my neighbor's property. So I start going down that trail, and this is completely dark out there. I've got my pistol out, I've got my flashlight. I'm still 90% convinced this is human beings. I'm walking down the hill, and I get to this. There's a big boulder out there, and all of a sudden, these huge, not huge, but little rocks start falling all around me. They don't hit me, but they're falling all over the place. So I stop, and it actually kind of freaks me out a little bit. You know, super confusing to have rocks, like a big handful of rocks thrown at you. You don't know where it's coming from. But after those rocks were thrown, I'm like, all right, well, this is human. This is a human being. So I backed up a little bit, and I'm like, all right, I got to find, there's only so many places they can be right now. So I start walking again, and rocks start falling all around me again. And I yell out, if you hit me with a rock, I'm going to shoot you. Nothing happens. I keep walking down that trail, and I go back in the woods a little bit. I didn't realize this till later, but right there in that small wood line is where I actually think they were at least hanging out at night. There is a place that's almost a perfect circle that's got thick pine straw, and I've been finding bones back there. So I think that's why they were hanging out there, or where they were hanging out. But anyway, I look around. I don't know. I'm back there 10, 15 minutes. Pistol in my hand, flashlight in my hand, looking all over the place. I'm not being quiet, nothing. I don't see anything. I don't hear anything. I hear a little bit, but it was like no more than like a mouse type movement, nothing obvious. I start walking back up the trail again, and I get to the very top, and I've got my thermal out, and I'm looking around, and I'm looking at my neighbor's backyard and their wood line. And as I'm standing there, there is a rock that's about 25 feet away from me. It's actually a boulder. It's probably comes up to maybe just below my belly button, and it's about 3 feet wide. But from the area of where that rock is, I'm looking over at my neighbors. So this rock is kind of off to my 2 o'clock. Okay. From where that boulder is, this thing growls at me. It goes, "Whoa!" And right then and there, it clicked. I'm like, these things are 100% real. That's really all it took for me to come to the realization that, um, I'm dealing with something that I do not understand. And I've actually got a thermal held to my eye, and it scared me so much that all I could do was pull my eyeball off the thermal and look in that direction and just wait. I thought I was going to get I thought something was about to hit me, about to jump on top of me or whatever. So I'm just waiting for the impact, basically. Um, Nothing happens. And I take my flashlight out and start looking around. I don't see a thing. And all I say is, all right, dude, I get it. It's complete and total understanding. Is I think this thing was letting me know, hey, this is what you're dealing with. And I totally understood from there on. Um, Now it would be, I could only stand there for about 3 minutes. I was definitely scared. I was very concerned at the fact that I was out there looking with it with a flashlight and a pistol, and it got within 25 feet of me without me even knowing. And there would have been, that's one thing people need to realize at night, especially. I mean, I've been 40 feet away from one during the day and had no idea it was there. Uh, I had saw it earlier, and we thought it was gone, but I've got video of it, and it's actually 40 feet away during the daytime, and I had no idea it was still there. So at night, like a lot of people have asked me in the past, aren't you scared of doing this at night with no lights? No, I'm not anymore, because it's, if they want to do something, there's nothing you're going to be able to do about it. It's just not going to happen, unless you have a gun on you and you are pointing it out in front of you in the same direction as this thing's coming right at you, you might have a chance. But from what I've experienced, if they want to hurt you, there's nothing you can do about it. But I've never experienced any situation where they've done that at all. So that was really the day where I jumped in head first. You still with me? Any questions?
No, it's a fascinating story. Just go right ahead. You're good.
Okay. I was just making sure the audio was connected still. um, so, I learned a lot that evening, and I just became super fascinated with the fact I can't believe these things are real. And I started listening to every podcast that I could get a hold of, listening to interviews, contacting people, talking to witnesses. I wound up making just a little Facebook group to try to find partners. My first research partner was a guy named Mike Taylor. He's a professional adventure athlete and mountain climber. Him and I started going out to North Georgia. Well, it would be about 2 years. It would be a year after the growl, the following October, um, I had my first sighting, but it was at night. I was sitting on my front porch, and my driveway comes across at an angle, comes across my yard and goes to the side of my house. And I'm just sitting there. I used to work evenings, so it's super late. I get home about 11:30, something like that. It's probably 1 a.m. I'm just sitting up there on the front porch, and my neighbor's house. It's actually, I think it's 130 yards away from me, but it's a big white two-story house, and they have all the lights, all their outdoor lights on. So I'm just sitting out on the front porch, and I see the full body silhouette of a Sasquatch. It's like when you look at, you watch a movie and like a werewolf gets in front of a full moon or something like that. That's what it looked like, because my neighbor's house completely backlit this thing. I could see it from the ankles up. Um, it was its right side, so it walks out in front of the house, and I see its right side, and the first thing I notice is how far its chin's sticking out, like a massive, like a caveman, like a massive underbite. Is basically what it looked like from the side. Well, I stand up, and so it starts out sideways. I see its right side, and it's just walking, and I stand up, and its legs, it keeps walking in the same direction it is, but it turns its upper body towards me. And when people say 4 feet wide, they're telling the truth. This thing was every bit 4 feet wide. And that's when I already knew from the side view, but then when it turned straight on, just the size of this thing was mind blowing. So I probably saw it for about 6 seconds walking in front of that house. And that's all it did. It just walked. I could see it sideways. And then it turned facing its upper body straight at me. And it stayed in that position until I couldn't see it anymore. That was pretty, obviously, very convincing, but still, even till my first sighting, I always held out that maybe somehow, some way, I was wrong. You know, I was very, if there's any kind of advice I can give anyone who gets started in Sasquatch research and you have not seen one and you're trying to see one, the best advice I can give you is, if you get involved in this, proceed as if you know they are real and be ready at all times. Because I still, even a couple years into it, I held out because I had not seen one 100% um, during the daytime. I had to have that daytime sighting. So after that, I really jumped in. Um, I wound up meeting I wound up meeting a guy from that Facebook page called Captain Joe Cayley. Um, he lives in Georgia now. He was an Army Ranger sniper, and he was injured in Iraq. An IED went off, and he he actually wound up getting a medal from, I believe it was Obama personally, because he wound up saving the lives of 3 civilians, and that's how he wound up. He was rescuing these 3 civilians from a car, and a secondary IED went off and injured his leg, and they wound up taking it. Well, he got this award for bravery and everything else, and when he got out, he started doing some contract work. And one of the things he did was he was running a sniper competition on a military base in Georgia. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole thing. We've got a YouTube channel, the Sasquatch Encounter Brigade, and you can go there. And it is, if you go all the way to the very beginning, our first episode, Captain Joe tells his story. But basically, he sees a Sasquatch in the middle of a sniper competition. He's surrounded by professional observers. It's in the middle of the daytime. He's in charge of the competition. He sees it cross the road out behind the last berm at about, I think it's 1,300 yards through a scope. So that's how he winds up getting involved. Um, so he contacts me and tells me about his story. We become friends. And he's like, dude, why don't we start a podcast? And I'm like, man, I really had no interest in doing that, to be honest with you. I was only comfortable with my little Facebook page. I've never been, if you would have told me in 2016 that 8 years from now, you're going to be interviewing witnesses, getting on the phone with complete strangers and sharing personal parts of your life online with thousands of strangers, I would have been very offended because you were calling me a crazy person. I None of this was. I had no intention of getting this involved or this public with any of it. Really, I was honestly. It was a selfish endeavor for me to find out the truth. But when he asked me to do the podcast, initially I was like, "Nah, dude, I don't want to do that." But then I thought about the fact that you got Captain Joe. Is a very very good guy. I know him just personally as a friend, someone who laid his life on the line, not just for the country, but in his actions for an Iraqi family that not everybody's going to do that. But he did. And that's the type of person he was. For him to not be able to, or to feel like he can openly talk about his sighting that he had and that people actually don't believe him, it bothered me. It's like, what's it going to take, for people to believe these things? What when it comes to a witness, what more do you want? So that's why I was willing to get involved. And so we started doing the podcast, and I wanted to put together a group, research group. I'd always wanted to do that. So we were contacted by a guy named Happy Harris. Captain Joe was contacted by him, and he lived in the Augusta area. And he told Captain Joe a story from when he was 19 years old. So at the time, it had happened about 32 years prior. When he was 19 years old, he was hunting on a buddy of his property outside of Augusta. He was set up in this blind, like he was walking on, it's a pipeline that runs down the center of this property. And he was set up on this pipeline because he had walked up to what he thought was a human made blind. It just like it was a hasty, just like sticks and limbs thrown up against this big tree. So we thought a human did this. So he went and laid down in this blind deer hunting. I think he said he was there for 30 minutes. And two Sasquatch came up behind him, screaming in what a lot of people know as the samurai chatter, like absolutely screaming at him. Well, he passed out from fear, and he wakes up 300 yards away, sitting up in the front seat of his truck. Has no idea how he got there. Well, initially I was like, man, that's kind of a crazy story. I don't know if I buy that one. So then Captain Joe, he connects me with Happy. I talk to Happy and I'm like, dude, I think I believe this guy. And looking on the map, this property's perfect. It's very super rural, uh, basically farmland and woods for miles. And this property had been in this one particular family's name since before America was America. It was a king's grant. That's how long these people have owned this property. And all they use it for is hunting. I'm like, dude, this guy's telling the truth. We need to go check this out. So we put a team together. Happy agrees to it. He After his little incident when he was 19 years old, he pretty much quit going out in the woods. That's how bad it scared him. Like he would go duck hunting every once in a while, stuff like that. But he actually had another incident when he was even younger than that. But he was deathly afraid of going out in the woods, pretty much. But we got him agree to do it. He wanted to meet his demons head on. And all we were wanting to do, I thought, if nothing else, we could record Happy telling the story in the spot where he had his encounter. So it's me, Captain Joe, Happy Harris, and a guy named Scott DeForest. and another guy named Joey. And we all go out to this property. Captain Joe has a hunting cabin only about 25 minutes away. So we planned on staying in the hunting cabin and then checking this Happy's buddy's property out during the day. We get out there and we cut through this little wood line, and he's looking for the exact spot where this incident happened. And as he's looking, Scott says, "Hey, I got tracks." And right after he says that, I look down and I'm like, "Hey, I got tracks." I'm standing right next to what appears to be a Sasquatch track, and it's out in the middle of this pipeline. There's a deer feeder out there, and these tracks look like they're running away from the deer feeder. We're already kind of celebrating because we're like, "Man, he's he's telling the truth." I think. I mean, this is crazy. If they're actually here, that means they've been here for 30 years. So we start following the tracks, and we actually go in the woods and we come to this big pine straw bed. It looks like a human being laid down in the middle of the woods, reached out and grabbed a bunch of pine straw and moved it to the center and made a bed out of it. And there was like a crease in the middle of it, like something had been laying in it. None of us, um, we've all hunted, especially in Georgia. Captain Joe was a professional hunter. He worked for uh, the Outdoor Channel on a television show called The Pig Man. He's hunted all over the world. We'd never seen anything like this. So we found that, got super excited, found a couple other things. It gets dark. We're all hanging out with the property owner. We got our trucks out in the middle of this pipeline. We start playing coyote calls. Um, Everybody kind of packs up and leaves, except for me, Happy Harris, and Scott DeForest. We're standing out in the middle of this, probably about 30, 40 feet away from the wood line in the middle of this pipeline. We've got a fire. And after everybody leaves, about 45 minutes later, we hear this almost canine sounding yell. Now I'm recording, I've got a GoPro that records this whole night, all the audio. So we hear this yell, it's like, "Ooh." What we don't hear, which I've got recorded, is what we believe is a Sasquatch vocalization. After these howls, it goes, uh, just as obvious as can be. We didn't, what's really weird is we didn't actually hear that in person. All we heard were the howls. So we start getting excited. We're like, "Oh, this is pretty awesome." Maybe 30 minutes goes by, if that, and I start hearing what sounds like a bunch of crunching around in the wood lines or the wood line. And I tell them, "Hey, you guys hear that?" They're like, "No, I don't hear anything." And right after I say that, a rock comes flying out of the woods and hits. I just bought a brand new Bronco. It's parked. There's no trees over it. It's out in the pipeline where we're at. It's probably 20 feet away. A rock flies out of the woods and hits my Bronco. Now there's two reactions. Number one, I'm a little upset. It's a brand new vehicle, but that was my excitement definitely overrode those feelings. We're actually like, you can hear me in the recording going, "Yes, yes, God dang it, yes, this is great," because we're pretty convinced that it's a Sasquatch throwing rocks. Then we hear a grunt, very loud, very obvious grunt. This is all recorded. Um, and Happy Harris goes to pick up a flashlight and turn it on. Right when he turns it on, I tell him, "Turn it off, turn it off." When he turns that flashlight on, the Sasquatch over there in the wood line goes, and every bit of this. So basically, what we have is extremely good vocals from the howls and the to about 5 minutes of this creature over in the wood line making noises, which this is our first trip out there. So it's a massive success. We're super excited. We think this, obviously, this property is going to be great. We go out there about three more times. On the third time, and I know I don't have very much time, I'll kind of make it. I won't go into huge detail, but basically, what happens on our third outing out there Me and Captain Joe were checking out that wood line. I had been out there with Scott DeForest for several hours, probably 4 hours. We get done checking one side of the property. Happy and Captain Joe show up. We're hanging out in the middle of that pipeline again. It's the middle of the day. We'll probably hang out for 2 hours, laughing, joking, the whole 9 yards. What we think will happen is we're just going to go check out these. We want to check out those beds again because on the trips after the first one, it actually looked like something was keeping up with these beds, keeping it clean and redoing them. We actually found two of the beds. One got flooded, so it looked like they made these pine straw beds originally. It got flooded and then made another one, and whatever it is was keeping up with this bed. So that's all we were going to do. We're going to go check it out. That, and there was a logging crew on the other end of the property. So me and Captain Joe go walking around on that side of the property, looking around. We check the beds. We probably walk around for 40 minutes, and I've got a rear-facing GoPro video, or a rear-facing GoPro. It's recording everything behind me. And then every once in a while, when I find stuff, I'm recording stuff with my phone. Probably 15 minutes prior to what's about to happen, I tell Joe, hey man, I don't think they're here anymore. Maybe we'll have some activity at night, but let's just go back. And he agreed. He's like, yeah, we hadn't found anything new. The beds haven't changed. The entire situation felt like there's no reason in the world why we would see anything that day. 15 minutes later, we're walking along. Captain Joe's 60 feet behind me. And I'm walking. And for whatever reason, I stopped dead in my tracks and I turned to my right. And there is a Sasquatch standing completely unobstructed about 50 feet away from me. Broad daylight. This is 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon during the summertime, something like that. And it looks to me like I could not see any sexual organs. I started calling it a juvenile because it looked skinny and scraggly. It looked like a teenager. It wasn't any taller than me. It was jet black. It had a gray face. It had this crazy looking cowlick on the front, like its hair stuck up in the front. And it had a white goatee. And it was standing, kind of crouched a little bit with its arms like this. And it was actually like looking down at, like with a scowl, like it was frowning at me, is what it looked like. And it's just as clear as can be. If I had any doubts before this moment in time, they were instantly erased. But I have a decision to make. I'm looking right at this thing. My phone's in my pocket. So the only thing I can think to do is pretend like I don't see it. So I turn my back, trying to get it on the rear facing GoPro. I'm going to turn my back to it and try to get it on video. And at the same time, I reach down in my pocket, I grab my phone, and I move back and forth like this, trying to get it, if it's still behind me, and I turn my phone on and I turn back around and it's gone. I yell to Captain Joe. I tell him what's going on. We get the GoPro turned off because I think maybe I've got it recorded on there. And then we separate. I'm like, all right, dude. Inside, I'm freaking out, right? It was a great experience, but I never expected that. In the middle of the day, everything was working against us. We had already been out there. There was a logging crew out there. We'd been loud. There was really no reason that I could figure that this happened. Was not expecting it at all. So I go off in the area where I saw it, trying to see if there's tracks anywhere. And while I'm out there looking, Captain Joe's maybe 70 feet behind me, and he yells, I see it. This is probably 8, 9 minutes later. So it had plenty of time to get away, but it did not. So I wind up turning around, coming back to Captain Joe, and he tells me that there's this big pile of dirt out there in the woods. It's near where we've got the shooting lanes that are cut. They've been cut over the years for deer hunting. So there's a big pile of dirt there. And he said, well, I'm off in the woods looking around for tracks, that he sees the same thing I saw from the waist up, cross behind this berm from the waist up. So now we're both freaking out. I call Scott because Scott is back at our campsite in the middle of the pipeline and say, hey, dude, me and Captain Joe just saw one. It's coming your way. And I'm already saying, I think there's no real reason for it to go this direction. It's going down the same path that we came up back towards our camp. And I even say in the video, I think it's trying to take us back to our camp. So we're sitting there talking to each other. And again, it had ample time to get away. And we start hearing braking, intentional braking, like it's trying to get our attention. So him and I just keep following behind it. I come to a creek and I look down, and there is what initially I think are footprints, but they're not. They're from the three fingers, where I think it went down on all fours. It stuck its finger in the mud. Till this day, that's one of the best pieces of evidence, freshest piece of evidence I've ever gotten. I mean, it just made these fingerprints like 2 minutes before this happened. So him and I stop and we're going, oh my God, this is great. Can't believe this has happened, blah, blah, blah. And it starts making noise again. So me and Captain Joe keep following. Every once in a while, we hear it again. We don't see anything. We get through the wood line to the end of to where we come out into the clearing of the pipeline. And we look both ways. We see Scott DeForest. He's in the back of his truck, yelling, waving like this. And me and Captain Joe are freaking out. And I record the whole time we're walking that path behind it. I'm recording. And we get out in the middle of this pipeline, and Captain Joe, and I even say it on the video, like, dude, you look like you just got in a firefight. His eyes were this big around. And I'm sure I looked the same because it was so surreal how it was like it intentionally herded us out of there. It actually flanked us. It waited on us. It's like it intentionally let me see it. Then it intentionally let Joe see it. Then it wanted us to follow it, is basically what every bit of that felt like. So we start walking towards Scott, and he says that after we call him, he's standing up in the back of the truck with his binoculars, and he sees the Sasquatch come out on all fours, doing what's known as the spider crawl. At first, he had no idea what this thing was. It looked so weird. He couldn't tell what it was. But then it turned towards him, and he could see its head like up like a periscope, and its arms out like this, and it just turns, does a U-turn, and goes back into the woods. And about 10 yards away, me and Captain Joe come walking out of the woods. So this thing had intentionally gotten us to follow it all the way to the pipeline, did a button hook, and went back on the wood line. It was 10 yards away from us when it did that, and we had absolutely no idea. Now, this was obviously a dream come true. It's everything we've been working for. It caught us completely off guard. We didn't think there was any way in the world that this was going to happen in the middle of the day when it actually happened. We did get, now I wasn't recording. I didn't get it on the rear facing GoPro camera because whenever I turned my back towards it, the same direction I was turning is the direction he went. He went in a circle as I turned. But when I started recording after that, after me and Captain Joe came together after he saw it, is actually where I got it on video. It's back in the wood line. It's down on all fours. It looks just like a monkey in the face. It's got the white goatee, and it's got the big cowlick. That's actually how I found it on the video the day after. So we did get it on video. But if that's not enough, and that's not hard enough to believe, after all that happens, it's now about 25, 30 minutes before dark. We've all talked about it, made phone calls, celebrated. I've set a thermal camera up. Maybe 45 minutes has passed. We're standing there, and Scott DeForest says, he yells, "There's another one." Now, about 100 yards away, probably less, there is a much larger one, the same exact color, the same black, running across the field on all fours. It goes across the field right in front of us, hits the opposite wood line, takes a right, runs away from us, and then goes into the turns left and then goes into the wood line right at a creek. That was almost a little more than I could handle. That was it was very evident at that point in time, and throughout the years, I've got a bunch of evidence from my property, tons of vocalizations, a couple thermals. I've experienced a whole bunch of things that suggest to me these creatures are extremely intelligent, and that's probably the two things that keep them hidden more than anything else. Number one, I think they spend a lot more time on all fours than people realize. They are they. It's not like they can run on all fours. What I saw this thing do, it's perfectly built to do what it did, and the way it ran is like nothing I've ever seen before. It basically, the closest thing that I could describe, it's like a bullfrog jumping is what it looked like. Its arms and legs would come in together, compress. They would both spring out. He would be in a Superman position. This thing's probably, if I had to guess, it wasn't standing up, it's on all fours. This one was much bigger than me. It had to be over 6 feet tall, maybe between 6 and 7. It was a lot bigger. Obvious adult. If I had to guess, a male. But when its feet, arms, and legs separated and it went into this Superman position, it was only like maybe 2.5 feet tall off the ground. It was unreal to watch this thing move across this field. I say run on all fours. That's just because it wasn't on 2 feet. Um, it was almost like watching that video game Frogger, the way it moved. But watching that happen and all the events of that day and everything uh, all the evidence I've collected over the years, I've got tons of vocals from out here. I'm about to, summertime's a little bit of a lull for me. Activity goes down around here during the extremes. I'm about to put together all the videos of actual interactions, just the interactions, just the throwings, the breakings, the vocalizations, and the thermals. We've been doing this for over 3.5 years on the channel, but I'm about to do kind of a documentary of everything. And I've gotten a ton of evidence. And the two things I've learned is, number one, these things are super intelligent. What those creatures did on that day, uh, they had no reason to do. They had a plan. They executed that plan. I think all of us think they were trying to get us out of that area. They knew if it made noise and waited around, that we would follow it. So it knows how humans will react to it. Having the big one, there's no reason in the world that big one should have ran out in front of us like that. We had been there all day long. The other one had already messed with us. We'd already seen it. We didn't surprise it. It could have it could have waited another 40 minutes and it would have been dark, and it could have crossed, it wouldn't have, maybe 100 yards away on either side, it could have crossed that field. There's also a creek that runs across that field that's about 7 feet deep. From the top of the creek down to the water is about 7 feet. That's how deep that ditch is. It could have stayed in that ditch and crossed if that's where it was trying to go without being seen. Those things intentionally did what they did that day. For what reason, I don't know. We can only suspect. I don't think they use structures or beds to actually sleep in. I don't think they need to. I don't know what those beds were. Maybe it was specifically for having children. I don't know. All 100% speculation. It may not have had anything to do with the beds, but for whatever reason, I think those creatures wanted us to leave. It's very obvious that they've been there for over 30 years because his initial incident was he was 19 years old. So the whole thing was not only amazing, a dream come true, but it was a real eye opener as to what these things are capable of and their level of intellect. So, but
Exactly.
that's pretty much the highlights of
Well,
the
it's
past
a
couple of
lot
years.
of wonderful highlights that you've experienced. I'm sure that we could talk for another hour. Unfortunately, I'm going to have
Oh
to
yeah, yeah,
go, but thank you so much. I mean, I was just really attentive to what you had to say. It's just a
right.
really, really great story. I really appreciate your coming on. Maybe we can do this again and we can talk about it some more.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. Got some more stories and a bunch of evidence. Like I said, pretty much just have a YouTube channel and a Facebook page. The Sasquatch Encounter Brigade is the group, and we got a lot of evidence. Like I said, I'm going to go back and do a whole video of probably 3 years worth of interactions and put all that together. So,
That will
but
be
I appreciate you
fascinating to
having me
watch.
on.
Yeah, fascinating to watch. I'll let you know when this comes out.
Okay,
Okay, thank you.
that'll work. Thank
Okay.
you.